how does Flix approach this challenge in having its own identity in a very, very competitive niche in exhibition?
So that's kind of a softball for a guy like me, because what is the name of the concept? Flix Brewhouse. So let's first talk beer, right? Because everybody likes talking beer.
This is the Boxoffice Podcast. I'm Russ Fischer, the editorial director of the Boxoffice Studios, and I am joined by Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Boxoffice Pro, and Rebecca Pahle, the deputy editor of Boxoffice Pro. Before we get to everything we're going to talk about this week, I want to mention that today's episode is part of our Indie Focus series, which is brought to you by Spotlight Cinema Networks, featuring Matthew Baizer, the COO of Flix Brewhouse. Spotlight Cinema Networks is the only cinema advertising company dedicated to serving the needs of art house, luxury, and dine-in exhibitors for cinema advertising, pre-show entertainment, event cinema, and digital display distribution. Spotlight offers unique revenue-generating advertising programs tailored to an upscale and influential cinema audience. In collaboration with Boxoffice Pro, Spotlight Cinema Networks is proud to present Indie Focus, a monthly interview series profiling industry thought leaders, iconic art houses, and executives from the country's leading luxury cinema circuits. To find out more about Spotlight Cinema Networks, visit spotlightcinemanetworks.com. And now, here's Daniel to introduce the second sponsor of this week's episode.
And actually, this sponsor is coming through the concession stand. Oreo Cookies has figured out a way to take a concession stand classic to the next level. That's right, it's Oreo popcorn, and it's popping up at theaters across the country. This new blockbuster treat is made with real Oreo cookie pieces, drizzles of Oreo-based cake, and drizzles of Oreo cream. What better way to welcome back moviegoers than with an amazing salty and sweet treat that combines America's favorite cookie and popcorn to create true movie theater magic. Want to taste a snack that's destined to be a hit for yourself? You can head over to OreoPopcornSample.com for a complimentary sample of Oreo popcorn. Again, that's OreoPopcornSample.com to get your complimentary Oreo popcorn sample today.
And so now we've got a couple of big box office subjects to discuss. One of them I'm so excited about because it's Dune opening overseas. But first, before we get to that, we're going to talk about Marvel's Shang Chi, which leads the box office again for a third consecutive weekend. Daniel, numbers-wise, what are we talking about here?
That's right, Russ. Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings from Disney scoring the third consecutive weekend here atop the box office in North America, with $21.7 million from around 4,000 screens. Guys, that's a very good drop here in its third frame, only 37% from its first holdover. It is now the second highest grossing movie of the year domestically, with $176.9 million. To give you guys some context, Black Widow was actually at $154.8 million at the same point in release after 3 weekends. Currently, that's the top pandemic title in the US and Canada, with a total of $183.8 million domestic. So we are looking at a situation that it's going to be very likely that Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings will become the top title at the domestic box office as early as this weekend. I think just looking at this IP, it's a little bit of an upset. I'm not sure what you guys think, but we really have to look at that theatrical exclusivity as a big reason why a title like this one ends up being on top at this point in the pandemic.
I mean, I personally, I'm not that shocked or surprised. Russ, it's something that you've expressed on the podcast before that, Black Widow, it kind of felt a little bit like its time had come and gone. It didn't feel, for me personally, so much like an essential, fresh part of the MCU. And, another factor to Shang-Chi performing so well, admittedly, it's a factor that applied to Black Widow too, is that it's really holding on to those PLF screens. And, of course, it has theatrical exclusivity where Black Widow never did, even if you had to pay $30 to see it at home on Disney+.
I think those are all good points. There's another thing that I wonder about, and that is impossible for us to quantify, but I do want to bring it up. obviously, over the past year, we've talked a lot about the push and pull between two dominant markets right now, between theatrical exhibition and between streaming at home, premium VOD or regular VOD. Shang Chi, sometimes I say Shang Chi, sometimes I say Shang Chi. I've got to standardize this. We're not going to cut this. We're going to leave it in. But this time I'm going to say Shang Chi just to mix it up. I wonder about the degree to which this title benefited from Marvel's very popular slate of streaming series on Disney+. I'm talking about Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision. These are shows that have really captured big chunks of the pop culture zeitgeist over the past 6 months and have kept the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though it wasn't cinematic exactly, alive in the minds of fans when there was not a new movie to see. And so,
can I intro that? They kept the Marvel momentum going, so I'm going to coin the word Marvel-mentum right here before allowing you to.
I think that Stan Lee has probably, at some point, Stan Lee must have written that in a column in 1978 and then said Excelsior and used 7 exclamation points. And we all thought, oh my God, you're great at this. And we would have been right. He was great at it. But yeah, the Marvel-mentum, we're going to have to workshop this. Anyway, I think that there is possibly an aspect of the popularity of the Marvel Disney Plus series that really helped this title out, because maybe if you're part of that fan base, this seems like a natural continuation. And it's not maybe the first big new chapter after a long drought where there wasn't any material going on. That story universe, that storyline overall has been alive for people in a big way over the past year.
I was looking at the notes here. I was going to say we had 2 new limited releases in theaters this past weekend. In my head, I thought Cry Macho was a limited film. It's not. That the new release from Warner Brothers, starring and directed by Clint Eastwood, did in fact open on just around 4,000 screens, which it doesn't really seem like a 4,000 screen film. Whereas you have The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which did open limited on 450 screens. Daniel, can you catch us up on how those 2 films did in terms of box office performance?
That's a good observation, Rebecca. And really, it's been an approach that Warner Brothers has taken with some Clint Eastwood movies in the past. I think most recently you had a movie like American Sniper that Warner Brothers opened a little bit deeper into award season. They opened it platform, then went limited, eventually went wide, and they had a huge hit in those winter months in the year that was released. This is a very different type of Clint Eastwood movie than an American Sniper, or say maybe than like a Sully that also came out not that long ago. This is more of an introspective title from the auteur that is Clint Eastwood, here working not only as director, but also as star, and really looking at his own career, at his own legacy through this movie. It's a very interesting movie because of that. The title, as you mentioned, opening in almost 4,000 screens. It's a wide release despite this day and date availability on HBO Max, opening in third place to 4.4 million. I know that's not a lot of money, but really this isn't that type of movie that had to reach a big, wide audience. It's not really designed for that. As I mentioned, this is one of those quieter Clint Eastwood movies. He's actually gone in this direction in the past as a director. Some of his most interesting movies, in my opinion, tend to be along this line. I think the high point was probably Unforgiven in 1992. But you've seen some of these themes also pop up in other types of movies that he's directed. I'm also thinking of titles like $1 Million Baby or Gran Torino. Cry Macho, I think, works in tandem with a very recent Clint Eastwood movie, that is The Mule. Both Cry Macho and The Mule look at the relationship between the US and Mexico through the border. So it's maybe not a great movie. Some of the performances I don't think work that well, but I definitely think it's a very interesting movie.
Yeah, things being what they are right now, I watched the beginning of Cry Macho. I wasn't able to watch the entire movie because the weekend got away from me. But I have been a Clint Eastwood fan all of my life. I come, at times I'm more of a fan than others, but I can never not watch one of his movies, and that includes, Space Cowboys. And a lot of that is because my dad and I didn't necessarily connect over a lot of movies, but he was a big Clint Eastwood fan. I saw a lot of Clint Eastwood movies with him and with my parents, and it probably is part of the reason that I do what I do now, because we talked about those movies a lot. And so I watched something like Cry Macho through the lens of, wishing that I was able to watch it or at least talk about it with my dad. And so it's kind of appropriate that it is a reflective, meditative sort of movie that looks back at Eastwood's past and the roles that he's played, and also looks at the fact that maybe he, as both an actor and his characters as people, bore more responsibility for their fates than they would like to admit. There's a lot of heady stuff there. Again, I haven't seen the whole movie, but what I did see, I liked quite a bit. And I feel like it's interesting. Eastwood is at a time when Warner Brothers is kind of struggling to maintain their roster of top-tier talent in the wake of the day and date decision with HBO Max this year. They lost Nolan. Nolan's making his next movie with Universal. All accounts suggest that Denis Villeneuve is not entirely thrilled with Warner Brothers right now. But they've still got Eastwood, and Eastwood is, whatever anybody wants to say, Eastwood is marquee, major, master American filmmaker, big talent. And so it's interesting, that a movie like Cry Macho would open on 4,000 screens, because as you guys suggested, it's really not a 4,000 screen kind of movie. So in that respect, I like seeing just that it happened. It's like, it does kind of seem like an end of an era sort of scenario. All right, let's talk about Dune.
So sadly for you, Russ, we are still waiting till October 22nd for that release stateside, but it did debut #1 in several international markets over the weekend, and it did particularly well. I read on IMAX and premium large format screens, which I think shows that people are making the right decision on how to see this very visually striking film.
That's right, Rebecca. Dune opening in 24 overseas markets and making $37.9 million from nearly 8,200 screens in total, including several notable #1 debuts. In Russia, it made $7.8 million. That's the biggest September opening weekend of all time and the biggest opening film from the United States during the pandemic in that market. Moving down with top performers, you have markets like France, where it made $7.5 million. In Germany, it opened at $5.2 million. Italy at $2.5 million, and Spain opening to $2.4 million. In all four of those markets, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, this is the second biggest opening weekend of 2021. So that's a great head start for this title in its early overseas debut. I think that's very positive traction as we get closer to the US release of Dune. Guys, there's a lot of expectation around this title, but let's face it, it's far from being a guarantee. Yes, it's a big sci-fi epic, but it's among big sci-fi epics, it's a little bit niche and really not, let's say, as mainstream as one would think it would be. What are your impressions based out of this performance?
Well, and it's one where and this is something that's been stated already, so it doesn't really constitute spoilers or anything like that, but it very much is one part of the story. I mean, there is going to be, or there has to be, in order to complete the adaptation of Frank Herbert's book, a Dune 2.
And more specifically, a lot of the big, like, puts butts in seats sort of stuff is in the back half of the book. And so I have not seen this first movie yet, but just knowing the material really well, I'm really curious to see how they've broken it down and or what they've added to it or moved around to put, some big attention-getting sequences in this first movie, when really, if you look at David Lynch's original film or you look at the novel, a lot of the really big stuff, a lot of the action is in the back half. So, I mean, I've been concerned simply in the sense that I would like to see the full adaptation, which means I want the first movie to do well enough so that I might get to see the second movie. And yeah, I'm a little worried from that respect. But, I've heard good things, and everything that I've heard, even the complaints that people have aired to me, sound like Dune. So I feel like I'm probably going to be happy. It's just a question of whether general audiences respond well enough to make that second movie, a foregone conclusion.
It comes out on October 22nd. It's not going to have that weeks-long kind of ownership, I guess you would say, of premium large format screens that Shang Chi's having now, if only because Eternals comes out on November 5th. So obviously Eternals is going to kind of swoop in and get the PLF from Dune on that one. So, I don't know. We'll have to see.
And let's not forget about the elephant in the room when we talk about that opening weekend for Dune here in the United States when it does open across North America. Day and date. That's not something that this initial crop of overseas markets have had to contend against. They have really, for the lack of a better way of saying it, a month-long head start of an exclusive run with Dune to theaters before a pristine digital copy is available on HBO Max when it opens in the United States. So important things to keep in mind as we look at these early overseas numbers, great overseas numbers for a title like Dune. Let's hope that we can carry some of that momentum here in North America in late October. And moving on, guys, to our feature segment, we've got another great interview as part of our partnership with Spotlight Cinema Networks with the Chief Operating Officer of Flix Brewhouse. I've been to one of their locations in Texas before. I think it's a great concept. Rebecca, can you tell me a little bit more about this Flix Brewhouse concept before we get right into that interview?
Absolutely. Flix Brewhouse, and today our feature interview is with Matthew, their COO, combines three extremely good, extremely popular things: movies, food, and craft beer, which is actually brewed on site. Flix Brewhouse is actually celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, so happy birthday to that chain. It operates currently in 7 states. Now, I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone listening to this podcast that made things a little bit complicated during 2020 and 2021 when different state and local regulations made closing and reopening various Flix Brewhouse locations no easy feat. But we'll hear more about that from Matthew. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and happy to tell you kind of everything that's going on in the Flix ecosystem.
Could you start a bit by, talking about what 2020 was like for Flix Brewhouse, with the understanding that you're spread across, I believe, 4 or 5 states. So obviously it's going to be different from location to location.
It actually is 10 locations in 7 states. When the pandemic hit, we had 9. We actually had 3 that were in various stages of development. And we went and actually opened one of those in the middle of the pandemic. So that's how we got to 10. But it was quite a year, I have to tell you. So having theaters that were nearly completed when this hit, and having some that were in various stages of construction and all the crews had to stop, that was just the beginning of the problem. The actual reduction of staff related to furloughs and closures when this hit was just one of the most painful days of my life. And there I thought back in March that pain was going to be short-lived.
Oh, everyone was like, we'll be back by June.
Yeah, that goes to say the theme of this whole thing. Here we sit recording this in September of 2021, 18 months after this whole thing started. And I got to tell you, we guessed various things along the way at various times. How long it would last, when a vaccine would be available, when money would arrive for shuttered venue operators. What would the federal government do? How many stimulus plans would they pass? I got to tell you, I was wrong about everything. If somebody were to create betting lines on COVID-19 and ask me to pick a side, And if somebody did the opposite, they'd be a billionaire. It was just really, really tough. And one of the tough things is that Flix was built on this culture around beer and movies and fun and all these things related to happiness, right? And here we are in the middle of misery, having to take 1,250 rather, team members and lay them off. And then we've got, hundreds of thousands of guests in our loyalty database. And what do we say to them? And that was really the challenge, right? How do you communicate with the stakeholders of your company, whether it's your investors, whether it's your managers or team members or your customers? We don't have anything to say that's accurate, so we just stop talking. That's the reality of the situation. So the communication side from us, I would say, was rather poor. But the reason for it being poor is, how many times can I be the boy who cried wolf and say the wrong thing? Well, we think we're going to open next month. 6 months later, here we are. You said next month.
And that's such a challenge in once you're allowed to reopen. It changes with every state, along with the different operating restrictions. Matthew, how did you go about that reopening? What was the timeline of getting Flix Brewhouse back online and communicating different things to different audiences?
Yeah, so it was very different and different at different times too, right? So when we did our first attempt at a reboot was probably June, I believe, of 2020. That was the first time when we could open the doors and we could at least get some people back to work and, those kinds of things. And, we had a huge core group of team members returning to the business. Why? Because everybody was closed in March, right? Restaurants were closed. Everybody that we're competing for in the same sector for the same team member was closed. So we returned a good core of people, but then we shut down. And then we waited until August and we did it again. And we still had a good core group of people because there were a lot of food and beverage operators, in addition to movie theaters, that were still closed in various areas. But the third time, that was ugly, right? Now you've got restaurants back open. You've got people that need jobs. You've got federal stimulus and supplements to unemployment ending. And people need to go back to work, and we lost a tremendous amount of our core group. And then you've got, on top of that, to get back to your question, all of these different protocols that you need to deal with theater by theater, right? Some have spacing requirements, some don't. Some allow you to make sure that you leave a row between people, some don't. Some require masks all the time, some don't. Some even went so far as to say you can open for movies, but you can't open for food and beverage because then you would have to take your mask off inside the auditorium. Well, it's just untenable. We can't do that. Our core business is food and beverage. So how do we navigate it? Again, poorly, but to some extent, right? In other words, we just kind of threw in the towel and said, we've got to wait this out. It's just untenable to continue to do these things and try and manage all these different standards. And in addition to that, have to communicate this to people so that the people that are actually out in the field or your customers, for that matter, know what they can and can't do. It's just all horribly confusing.
Another aspect of that communication is not only what's going on in theater to theater, what the rules are, what the regulations are, but which movies are coming out, how they're coming out, what can you see in theaters, what do you have to see in theaters, what's coming out day and date. Once you kind of get the theaters back up and running, I assume you're at a much better place with that now than you used to be. How do you communicate on that level with respect to the content?
Yeah, so that was tricky too in the beginning. It's a lot simpler now because films don't seem to be moving, and certainly things aren't going on sale that are moving. Back then, we had films that actually went on sale. We sold tickets, and then they moved the date, right? So now we're in a position of, you want to wait? Do you want a refund? I mean, it's just a giant mess. We're not in a position now where we're dealing with that, and you can sense a bit of a comeback, right? You can see momentum at the box office. You can see a consistent film slate. All of those things are good. We still have some things we need to deal with, right? We've got variants out there. We've got mask wearing going on by all our team members. We have to make decisions on mandatory vaccinations or not at some point, both on the team member side and the guest side. We're not in a position to do that right now. Way too early for us, but as you can see, New York is requiring it for their employees as well as guests that come in to dine. So there's lots of things out there that are still in flux that'll continue to drive and change our business.
One of the, let's say, overall big picture parts of this narrative is that back when you guys opened in 2011, the dine-in space was, let's not call it in its initial stages, but it definitely hadn't been as pervasive, or it wasn't as much of a trend as it was right before the pandemic took off in 2020. So you had 9 years basically where you saw Flix Brewhouse grow along with this dine-in concept. As you guys were expanding, what did COVID mean for Flix Brewhouse as a circuit in terms of those expansion plans? What do they look like now for the circuit?
The dine-in business in 2011 is very different than it is now. Now, that's kind of an obvious statement because things always evolve over the course of 10 years. However, it was much more cutting edge. There were very few players that were in the dine-in space. Some people had tried them but hadn't really expanded. Now you've got chains that have expanded nationally over the course of that 10 years in the dine-in space. It's become much more of a common way to go see a film, right? And I think dine-in ultimately will benefit from this pandemic. And why do I say that? Because there still will be, let's not fool ourselves, there's still going to be plenty of titles that will be chosen to play day and date with theaters. And then what do you make a decision on as a consumer? The dine-in experience is more unique, and we're providing something that is much more difficult, not impossible, but much more difficult and time-consuming to replicate in home. So I believe that for special shows and shows that even will play day and date in home, you're going to see a greater affinity by the consumer to go see it in theater versus in dine-in theater versus a more traditional theater where the home is probably competing more in alignment. So that's the first part of that. What is different and what did we look like before and after, I believe was the other part of the question. Well, we had grown to 9 cinemas when COVID hit. We opened number 10. We had 3 in the pipeline. We lost one because we had an impatient landlord. Don't blame the landlord, right? We kept telling him, money's coming. We're going to get this done. We're going to be able to get a settlement and get this open. And he simply ran out of patience. And he also stopped believing in the cinema experience was going to be able to be viable long term, right? So we lost one in the process. So we are now back at the same 9, not necessarily the same locations, but the same number of 9 we had when the pandemic hit. Of those 9, 5 or 6, I think, we just opened, or just about to open number 6, has been reopened. So that leaves 3 left that are not yet reopened. We've announced a reopening date for our Albuquerque location, which was one of our most successful locations. And the public, I have never seen a welcome back like we're seeing from them. So much excitement in that community, which is terrific. It's also the only dine-in cinema with service at your seats in the entire state of New Mexico. So it has a great following. Then we have 2 more that have yet to open, and they're in various stages with the landlords, but I expect them both to be resolved. So by the time the middle of November hits, we should be back to a 9-unit company, and then we will start looking at a pipeline again, I imagine, eventually, once we get some stability, not only around movie schedules and what kind of content that we're going to get from distributors, but also deal with some of the short staffing issues that we're dealing with and get closer to fully staffed on the team member side of the business.
So Matthew, as we know, dine-in has grown considerably over these last 10 years. It's now a very competitive atmosphere for any circuit. You can't just differentiate yourself by saying, I'm a dine-in cinema. How does Flix approach this challenge in having its own identity in a very, very competitive niche in exhibition?
So that's kind of a softball for a guy like me, because what is the name of the concept? Flix Brewhouse. So let's first talk beer, right? Because everybody likes talking beer. And Flix started brewing beer in 2011. And craft beer was just getting its sea legs in 2011, right? It's much more greater market penetration, both in micro breweries as well as just general craft side throughout the country now. But Flix has been doing this for 10 years, and there are people that come to Flix just for the beer. And let me tell you one other thing. Little side story here. When I got to Flix, I didn't know much about it, right? It was an interview I was going on with our CEO, and I was coming here and I saw the name. I didn't do a lot of research in advance, and whatever, all that aside, I walk in, I see what it is. And what do? Because I had a night free before my interview. What do? I get on the phone and I call my wife and I say to her, "You're not going to believe this." She says, "What's that?" I said, "This place. You know how on our rare times when we're able to go to a movie, once a month, date night, blah, 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 there's two very, very compelling things here." And she asked what they were. And I said, number one, we get to eat while we're in the movie. Because you know how many times we're both working and we go out and we go to dinner and a movie, and I will tell you 20% of the time it's either dinner or a movie, because we never made both, because we were all like, it's too late, we're too tired, we got to pay the babysitter, all those kind of things. So that leads though to number two, which is the more compelling one, right? Because it's the point of differentiation that I was just talking about. So I said to her, we trade picks back and forth, and I would say I want to go see Rambo, and I would get a big eye roll and go, it's your pick, and then she'd go do her thing, and it would be like something that is back then it wasn't around, but something like Downton Abbey, or something that is a little more female oriented, shall we say. So I call her on this call from Flix, and I said, guess what? You could pick every movie from now on. And she says, why? And I said, because I can sit there and drink beer. I don't care what's on the screen anymore. And that made a huge difference. And that is, I believe, a differentiator for Flix. We end up having the female making the buying decision. We know this a large majority of the time, right? They're the plans makers. We have any female-oriented content, it goes completely crazy. So that beer hook, in order to be able to get people really kind of interested in what's going on at Flix, is very effective. We focus a lot on alternative events and not just traditional first-run content that we promote. And that's not necessarily something that you can get in your home, right? And we almost always, when we do those, what we call Flix Picks, we give you something to bring to your home. So we do a custom glass or something like that you'll get to bring home from the movie, and we get people that are literally collecting them for every single movie that we do that's alternative. And then last, we don't make it too fancy. And here's what I mean by that. We have modern brewhouse interiors, which I think are relatable to people. Accessible food, so there's nothing really crazy on the menu. And then pricing that is competitive on the ticket side with the large chains, right? So our box office pricing is similar to what you would see in any of the larger chains out there. We're not going any higher than they are. And then lastly, casual dining prices on the food and beverage side. So your typical large bar and grill or polished casual dining chain, we're going to mirror their pricing. So that makes us really accessible to a lot of people, all of those things combined. And I'm really happy and proud of the brand we've built in order to be able to make it a choice for those cities that we serve.
I've been to the Flix Brewhouse location in Round Rock in Texas, and one of my favorite experiences that I had there was ordering the flight of beers and having a little bit of a tasting experience of different locally brewed beers as I'm watching a movie. Those are those little details that turn a regular Wednesday, Friday, Sunday at the movies into an experience and offers that, I think, competitive advantage that we're talking about, distinguishing yourself from the competition and making it an appeal to get out of your home and not just quote unquote watch a movie.
Obviously, for dine-ins, for cinemas as a whole, we've seen a lot of operational changes over the last 18 months. Things like move towards more contactless ordering, mobile ordering, digital ordering. Sometimes, you have a switch up in the menu. From a dine-in perspective and from particularly Flix Brewhouse's unique dine-in perspective and how you design your theaters, what changes have you had to make from that operational perspective? And which of those do you think have viability maybe as something permanent for you?
Well, first there's the obvious, but then I'll take it a different direction. The obvious would be a focus on mass, focus on mobile, focus on contactless. So, things that I think would be, let's say expected and standard in society with our type of business as it sits right now, right? They're just necessary to deal with and to add in due to the pandemic. But what I think we need to talk about is changes that are needed in this model with or without COVID. And there are a lot of them. And so our innovation is focused on what would happen without COVID and why was it necessary. So this boils down to, two things. Labor, right? Because dine-in cinemas are very, very labor intensive. And secondarily, it boils down to guest choice and convenience. Okay. I'll tell you a quick story. I went to see a movie at Flix Brewhouse not too long ago. What was the movie? It was Respect. I went and saw Respect there. And there was a gentleman sitting next to me that about 2 seats down. And as I usually do, I'm doing my best to observe how people use Flix. And I saw him come in. He didn't even look at the menu. He wrote down everything that he wanted on a notepad. He had it all organized and ready for the server. Then the server came over, saw that anyway, and then proceeded to go through, have you been to Flix before? Let me explain to you how this works.
Clearly the man knows the menu.
Clearly going, I want you to get away from me. Here's everything I need. I love this place. Just give it to me how I want, right? And so I think that's a pretty compelling story and kind of what we need to respond to as an organization with the consumer. So where I'm headed with this is we need to figure out a way for people to pre-order, people figuring out how to add-on order, being able to control their own experience how they want it. So they could go, I don't want to do any of that. I want a server to come up to me and explain it to me and all those kind of things. Or they could say, I've got everything done and I don't need this service. And we can focus specifically on delivery and running. So that's kind of where we're headed as an organization, to figure out how to reduce some of the labor to right size it in order to be able to meet the expectations of the guests. Now, I have a whole nother Flix of the Future vision that I have been working on right when the pandemic hit. That had to do with robots and carrying trays to theaters and having only one person in there delivering that tray to the guest, because you got to move it from where the landing spot is in the theater to the actual guest. Having eliminated the box office and moved to kiosk-only transactions on tickets. There's all sorts of movements out there related to self-service alcohol these days, right? With self-service beer with cards, NFC or RFID kind of permissions for you to be able to pour from the tap. And you can do it with alcohol, you can do it with wine, you can do it with beer.
Those places are really neat. I've never seen a theater have that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the model of the future looks exactly like that, where you have a lobby where you have all sorts of beverage choices. They can be self-service because we have the technology to do it. We can cut down on order takers because we have the technology on the mobile app for mobile ordering, both in and outside of the theater. And then the inside the theater piece is the tricky piece, right? Because what you don't want is somebody turning on their flashlight and shooting a QR code in the middle of a movie. So we have to get that technology to be RFID technology, right? Where the background of a phone is automatically, if you're going to do this, dimmed down to the lowest possible black only screen so that the light doesn't interfere with your neighbor. And it allows you to get that menu pulled up, not by shooting a picture, but by RFID. And you can, it's already storing your payment method. You can add on anything you want during a show, and it will show up in complete automated fashion, with the exception of a person delivering it from its landing spot in the theater to you at your seat.
As long as there's some kind of advanced payment situation, you don't have to go through and deliver the checks and come back and do that. That would be my vote. That's my priority
That's right.
As a customer.
Yeah,
that's right. And one of the things, we didn't talk about this yet, but I have a note about it. One of the things we've done to make it more convenient, right? So deal with that on the customer end, but then also attract a whole additional set of future team members is as we've reopened each Flix, we've added on a suggested 18% gratuity to every single check. So that check comes preloaded with that gratuity, not one of those things that says this is the table down at the bottom. If you want to give 15, 18, 20, we all see that on checks in restaurants. This is automatically on there, and it has to go the other way. You have to call a manager and ask it to be removed.
It's like this is the climax of the movie happening. Don't ask me to do math.
Absolutely. So this has made it more convenient for the guest. It is, and it's also, there's a lot of people out there that they're blown away by the movie. They forget to sign their check. They don't tip. There's all sorts of things. This eliminates that and gets our servers a guaranteed income, and it's been phenomenal. I kid you not, we've done this in 5 open locations right now, and number 6 already had this. They were our test locations, so they'll just open back up with it. And I think I've gotten a total of 3 complaints. Right,
wow,
I'll take 3 complaints out of the number of guests.
Something that helps your staff, something that helps your staff retention as a manager, and something that helps the moviegoer enjoy the film more intently. I think it's a great initiative.
100%.
And that will wrap up this episode of the Box Office Podcast. Thanks again to Matthew Baizer, the COO of Flix Brewhouse, for joining us. The Box Office Podcast is produced by recordeditpodcast.com and the Box Office Company. And thank you all for listening. Please join us again next week.